I didn't think I would like The Glass Menagerie when we first started reading it, just because the plot didn't seem too interesting, and the play really only occurs over a couple of days, so I didn't think anything big could happen. But I really ended up liking the book, and I thought it was really interesting. The Wingfield family, they have financial issues, but they also have psychological issues, so it's kind of interesting to see how they balance that. Amanda, especially the mother, she constantly lives in a delusion. She was raised in the Old South with a lot of money. She had plenty of servants who took care of her and really did everything for her. She never really had to work hard in her life. And so now when she's living in a relatively poor situation with no husband, who abandoned her actually, she just can't overcome that reality, and she's waiting for the day when a handsome young man walks in and proposes to her daughter Laura, and she thinks he'll be rich and the whole family will live happily ever after. But she actually really believes it. Like, she starts cleaning the house every day, getting ready for someone to actually come, even though no one's supposed to come. She just thinks it's going to happen. And I think that even Tom and Laura, her kids, started believing it just because she talked about it all the time and she forced them to believe it. And when it didn't happen, when no suitors for Laura would come, she blamed Tom, Amanda did. And I think Tom is kind of the hero of this story because he puts up with his family. And that seems kind of like a harsh thing to say, but I just don't think Amanda really has any respect for him. She doesn't care about his dreams, and she complains that he's not working hard enough, even though he's the only one in the family that's working. He's the only one that's earning money, and she complains that he's drinking when he's really only drinking to kind of avoid his problems at home. I mean, his family's living in a delusion. They're poor. He kind of has to find an outlet for his rage, and he wants to become a writer, and he's working in a shoe factory right now, so he's not satisfied with his job, but he needs to work for his family. And I think what's really interesting is that whenever the narrator mentions Tom, like when the scene changes from Tom to someone else and comes back to Tom, he always says that Tom's writing, but never really tells us what he's writing. And I think this shows that we don't have to know what he's writing because no one in his family does. No one really cares about him. And I think that, I don't know, like Tom just has a really tough situation at home. And Amanda's particularly harsh on Tom. She doesn't care when Laura quits her schooling and just kind of sits at home and wanders around town, but she always blames Tom, even when he's not at fault. It's like she completely blames Tom for their situation. She thinks that he's the reason they're poor. And I think Tom was justified in running away at the end of the book, just because they just couldn't keep on living that way. They were living in a delusion, and it just didn't work. I think this book really reminded me of Death of a Salesman, and Amanda really reminds me of Willie, because they both just live in a delusion. And they also favor one child over another. I thought Willie really favored Biff. He kind of expected Biff to be the one to earn money and raise the family. And although Amanda's not looking at Laura to raise the family and earn money, I think she favors Laura, and she doesn't mind watching Tom work really hard for her. And so I think Tom was justified in running away. It's time for him to kind of pursue his own life, and it's time for Amanda and Laura, especially Amanda, to realize that she can't keep living in a delusion. And another thing was, Amanda also blames Tom for setting up Jim. Jim is a guy who Laura was in love with in high school, and he invites him. Tom invites Jim to come to their house to talk to Laura, not knowing that Jim's already engaged. And Amanda believes that Jim's going to be Laura's husband. And when Jim ends up telling her that he was engaged to someone else, Amanda flips out. She blames Tom. She says that he's ruining the family on purpose, that he wanted to embarrass them, and Tom just couldn't stand it any longer. And I think that's another example of how Amanda just acts completely irrationally. But I think that in the end, the play kind of had a happy ending, even though Tom ran away, and the family seems to be in a hard situation because Jim talked to Laura, and he really kind of convinced her that she was special and that she should have self-confidence. So I think that when Tom runs away, she'll have no choice but to step up and go to school again and earn a job and earn some money. And I think Amanda will kind of finally come to her senses and realize that she will not be living the Old South life again.